So now actually our next guest speaker is here. So we will move on to the next stage, but we hope to have maybe as part of his workshop, we'll have an opportunity for you guys to participate as well. And as you noticed, as part of Will's presentation, he talked about his climate story, how climate change has impacted his community, whether it's flooding in Miami, the building collapse that was, caused by flooding from sea level rise. So that the personal and human impact of the climate change and that personal story is really important to mobilize others and to move hearts and not only minds. And we think at FXB that your climate story is a really powerful tool for climate advocacy. So we always focus on honing that skill for the FXB climate advocates. And today we're especially privileged and honored to have Matt Scott, the Director of Storytelling and Engagement from Project Drawdown, a leading organization on climate change and climate solutions. Matt Scott, and I got to meet Matt in person in New York at the Climate Museum. I was just blown away, and just what a generous spirit and an amazing presenter. So we're just so privileged. It's the first time that we have Matt as part of this program, hopefully not the last. And also Matt is on vacation this week, but made the time to come speak to us. So incredibly grateful for the generosity. So Matt focuses on passing the mic to those who are often go unheard in the climate space. Inspired by human-centered design, Matt shapes and implements Project Drawdown strategy for climate solutions storytelling and collaborates with the Project Drawdown team to shape the contours of the organization's impact storytelling approach. Before joining Project Drawdown, Matt worked at the innovation agency Second Muse. He served as the global community director and storyteller of the world's largest global hackathon, NASA's International Space Apps Challenge, engaging over 100,000 people in more than 150 countries to create out-of-this-world solutions. He's worked with numerous organizations such as the Australian government, Pivotal Ventures by Melinda Gates, USAID, United Nations, Nike, and others. And Matt has an academic background in business administration and marketing from George Washington University in Washington, DC. And we're just really happy and honored to have Matt here with us today. And his work and his career in digital storytelling has reached nearly 500 million people with insights and inspirations focused on civic tech, ocean health, circular economy, sustainable food, nutrition, and other topics. And I personally am very moved by Matt and the stories he told us about his family in the workshop that I attended at the Climate Museum. So Matt, over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Karina. That just means the world, and that introduction was beautiful, and I appreciate you giving that introduction because it is so important that we share our stories. And I think it's also challenging sometimes for us to share our stories and bring ourselves fully into the different rooms that we're in. And so I'm just so grateful to be here with all of you. And what I'm actually going to do is to share my screen in a second. But the very first thing that I want to ask all of you to do, and it would be amazing if you could respond in the chat, is to consider a question. Who or what got you engaged in climate solutions and in being climate advocates? So maybe there's a word that you want to put into the chat or a few words that you want to put into the chat. But again, my question is, who or what got you engaged in climate change and climate solutions? And thank you, Karina, for putting that in the chat as well. And if it's more than one thing that comes to mind, feel free to drop that in. And I'm really curious to see what folks have to share, because I always feel like, and I think that we'll start seeing some responses soon, but I always feel like there are different things that motivate us, that get us engaged, that get us involved in climate solutions or in climate, and it's different for each person. So typically when I hear from folks, and I'm excited to look back at the chat to see this soon. I'm going to share my screen actually with this question so you all can see it. But I feel like the really amazing when I've asked people this question, like, while there's a diversity of responses that come to mind or that come up, all of them are valid. Like if you learned about climate change or climate solutions through a teacher or through hearing about this program or through talking with family or through personal experiences, all those things matter. And back to the importance of your story, I would just, if there's one thing you could walk away from today with, it's just a reminder that your story matters. And so I'm going to take a look at the chat. And again, I would love for folks to add their response to the chat. So I'm seeing a few of the responses here. As I scroll around, give me a second. So Carolina put into the chat the news channels growing up. Yes, news is definitely one thing that gets a lot of people engaged in climate change and climate solutions. Sarah mentions my children's future, my community. I'm seeing more and more responses come in, extreme heat waves, living in Pakistan and being badly affected, friends and climate justice organizations. So there are so many reasons that we get engaged. And if there's one thing I could ask you to do before I share my storytelling work and my story with you, it's to keep that story of what engaged you in mind, because that is your superpower. And so today I'm going to talk about using storytelling as a tool in solutions. And I really do believe that stories aren't just important to make people feel good, but that they're really important to get people on board. And I'll talk a little bit more about the practical importance of stories. But again, if you are just thinking of what got you engaged, please feel free to add that to the chat as I share my own story. And so when I think of who or what got me engaged in climate solutions, and really more so in climate solutions storytelling, this work at Project Drawdown, I would say in large part has been my most significant engagement with climate solutions, despite the other elements of my background that Karina mentioned. And the thing that motivated me, the story that I actually shared at the Climate Museum, was growing up and being a kid who loves stories. This is a picture of me with my dad growing up as he shares a story with me. And one of the stories that I loved the most was an old cartoon. The organization is still around. This is Captain Planet and the Planeteers. And so if you look up Captain Planet, you'll actually see that there are a lot of different activities taking place each and every day. But this was a show in like this was the show mainly in the 1990s, but I think I became familiar with it as it was in syndication and everything else, which featured Captain Planet front and center and 5 Planeteers from 5 different continents, most of them real, each with their own power. As I grew up though, I kind of gravitated away from the cartoons and animated characters, and my dad, who I mentioned earlier, became this hero for me as I learned about his story. And so when I think of my dad's story, it actually goes way back to the 1950s in Prince Edward County, Virginia, where he grew up. And it's actually a picture of a schoolroom. He's not in this picture, but a schoolroom where he grew up. And one of the realities, we talk sometimes in climate spaces about justice and inequities, but one of the realities was that his school faced the inequities of not having as many resources. His school was a school that served Black students at the time in the civil rights era, or African-American students at the time in the civil rights era in the US. And it was segregated from the schools that had better resources and services that the white students in Prince Edward County attended primarily. And the thing that jumps out to me about my dad's story is that in 1959, due to an unwillingness to bring people together, due to an unwillingness to push back against the segregation, my dad and all of the students in Prince Edward County were left without an education, as you could see in this sign. The closing of the public schools took place, and what was stunning about that is that not only were the schools closed for a month or for a year, but schools in Prince Edward County, Virginia, all the schools, all the public schools that people had access to were closed for 5 years. And so people lost their access to education for 5 years until 1964, I believe. And my dad was actually one of the lucky few. You could see him in the back of the picture in the light suit to the left, who was able to move away and live with strangers in order to complete his education. And this story resonates with me because when I was growing up, I was stunned that this happened. I didn't realize until I heard my dad's story that there were students who didn't have access to school like I did, and that, you know, identity and his background and their backgrounds were one of the reasons why they were left without an education. My dad moved away, lived with strangers, graduated college, and actually graduated business school, where not only did he meet my mom, but the two of them went on to have me and the rest of my siblings. You see me in the bright orange shirt at the bottom. My dad was able to start his own home healthcare business to help people in the community. That's me also. And just overall make a positive impact in the world. And so 6 years ago, when my dad passed away due to a rare form of leukemia, which sort of came out of nowhere, what I found was that somebody is off the mute, by the way. There, thank you. But yeah, when he passed away due to a rare form of leukemia, it was kind of stunning because his story, his background, where he came from, that wasn't a story that was often told. And so with that missing story, I really found for myself the importance of, you know, using my storytelling skills, sharing his story, but also realizing that while he was someone who made a positive impact in the world, that there are so many people out there whose stories aren't told for one reason or another. And I've kind of made it my mission to pass the mic to make sure that the voices that often go unheard no longer go unheard. I believe that everyone, including each and every one of you, not only has a story, but deserves to share that story and be heard, and, you know, to be recognized and celebrated by those around you. And so the way that that connects with my work at Project Drawdown is that at Project Drawdown, we focus on sharing a different kind of story, but a story that often goes unheard as well. And for those who don't know, Project Drawdown is a global nonprofit climate solutions resource. One question that I often ask folks when I do talks and workshops that I will just kind of explain to you is, but sometimes I'll ask folks this question of what comes to mind when you think of climate change. And what's so interesting about that is that when 14,000 people were asked that question of what comes to mind when you think of climate change, a few years back, 44% responded with outcomes, 18% responded with causes of climate change, but only 3% responded with solutions. And it's interesting because when I've asked this question before to people in Zoom conversations or an in-person presentation, often it will be a very similar response where people often think about the outcomes and the causes, but not the solutions. And so I think that, you know, what that says to me is that a lot of people, when it comes to climate change, don't have this other part of the story, don't have the part of the story that's focused on what we can do. And that leaves a lot of us wondering, what can we do? How can we make a difference? And the other thing I think that's interesting about this is that, you know, each of us, especially young people, though, I think, as we are sort of, you know, going to inherit so many of the issues, the pressing issues that come with climate. Like, young people are left on a journey to figure out, what do solutions look like? How can we actually save our planet? And I think that stories are critical to that because back to the question I asked before, where only 3% responded with solutions. I think part of the reason that is that so often the ways that we communicate about climate and the ways we communicate about climate news, for example, are not focused on solutions. And we might focus on the science and the data and the statistics, but focusing on the crisis and even on some of those things that are a little bit less tangible to people lead to a sense of distance. They lead to a sense of doom at times. They lead to something called cognitive dissonance, which is this idea, cognitive dissonance is this idea that the ways that we're currently living essentially are the right way of approaching things, as opposed to embracing the new information about how we should live, despite it being based in science and data. There's climate denial, which I know many folks are familiar with, either personally or in the broader narrative. And then there are also conflicts with identity sometimes when we communicate about climate news in the ways that we do, because sometimes politics gets in the way of us embracing solutions, for example. And other identities, like us not seeing ourselves as powerful, lead to us not taking action. By the way, I should mention that this research is based on, or is actually from, psychologist and economist Per Espen-Stoknes, who does deep research on climate communications. But the other thing that Per shares in his research is the importance of stories, and stories that feature simple actions. In other words, stories that aren't overwhelming, stories that don't that aren't hard to grasp, but stories that are relatable. Part of that is that it's important to share stories that are social and feature characters that we can relate to. It's important to share stories that not only signal progress when it comes to emissions in the atmosphere, but also provide an idea of how we're actually supporting other elements of life that we care about. So for instance, how are we supporting health and creating jobs and supporting the economy and creating more safe and healthy communities, for example. Those are all important things when it comes to stories. And in the work that I do with Drawdown Stories, which I founded and began to lead a project, Drawdown, just a few years back, it really focuses on creating stories and putting stories out there that more and more people could relate to, especially from a diversity of backgrounds. There's actually a quote that I have for a long time, maybe for the last 10 years, been really inspired by, from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who is just an incredible speaker and voice in the community when it comes to so many issues. And one of the things that she says is that the single story, in other words, like having a narrative that is only focused on one thing, the single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they aren't true, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. I think I love this quote because, one, it's inspired my journey for a long time, but really it's a reminder for me that when it comes to climate change and even climate solutions, so often we only have one story. We have the story that we're doomed, and we have the story of the problem, but we don't necessarily have the story of what we as communities and as individuals could do about that problem. And that's where the work that I do and that I lead at Project Drawdown with this series, Drawdown's Neighborhood, comes in. Drawdown's Neighborhood is a climate solutions short documentary series that we actually launched about a year and a half ago at drawdown.org/neighborhood, so you can check out the episodes. And to date, we've featured 4 different locations, so Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Atlanta, Georgia, New Orleans, Louisiana, and the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota. This series in particular is focused currently on the US, but definitely we are working on other ways to bring in more voices and stories as we go on. And the thing I appreciate about Drawdown's Neighborhood and what we do is that it, again, passes the mic to voices and stories that have often gone unheard. As an example of this, actually, I mentioned the different stories and cities that we featured. New Orleans was actually the most recent one. And oftentimes, one thing that I found in my work is that the stories when it comes to climate and New Orleans often look like this. They focus on the storm. And this is a picture of a flooded New Orleans in 2005 during Hurricane Katrina. Here's another picture of people navigating that. And something that I think is really unfortunate in many of the stories that are out there is that we focus on the problem, but not on the power that people have and on what they could do. And so in my work, we recognize those problems, but we also feature people working on and moving solutions forward. And with that, I'm going to show you a video clip that is the 1-minute trailer video from Drawdown's Neighborhood New Orleans, featuring the 8 climate heroes who are working to bring solutions to life. Just to give you an idea of some of the climate solutions, or some of the ways that each person is working to contribute to climate solutions.
I'm Tynese Williams.
My name is Travis Banks.
My name is Ashley Thompson.
I'm Josh Benitez.
My name is Joncho Johnson.
My name is Willie Jones III.
My name is Melody Arcia.
My name is Shelly Stiez.
And I'm helping the world reach Drawdown.
I am helping the world reach Drawdown.
I'm helping the world reach Drawdown by building a resilient future,
By bringing power to those without power.
by encouraging young leaders through the meaningful work of growing food.
By planting trees in New Orleans.
Through restoration, exposure, and awareness.
You know, one thing I really love, other than just, one thing I love about Drawdown's Neighborhood and being able to interview people for it is that so many people featured have these really powerful stories and they've never been interviewed to share those stories. And yet there's someone who connects with that story. So you saw Tynese Williams at the end of the video dancing. And she's someone who likes to bring fun and, you know, more of an enjoyable atmosphere to the work that she does. You have, you know, Shelly Stiez, who describes herself as a city girl who grew up loving nature. And there are all these different examples of people who are just people we can relate to, whether it's a mom, whether it's whether it's someone who's a parent, a mother or father, whether it's someone who is passionate about these issues for a long time, or someone who's just discovering the importance of climate.
I'm Tynese.
And one of the things I want to share about stories as we go along is that they do have power. These are what are called the accelerators when it comes to climate solutions. I did reference earlier that sometimes when we think of stories, we think of the fact that they have the ability to inspire people and to engage people, but stories also have the ability to do a few of the things that are listed here. And so I'll go through the 3 accelerators of climate solutions, or the 3 levers that help move climate solutions forward that I think are most relevant to stories. For one, I'd say that stories have the ability to build power. How can we center the voices that often go unheard? Well, through stories, we could do that. And I actually point to one of the stories from Drawdown's Neighborhood from Josna Harris, who is the founder of an organization called Change Narrative and featured in one of the episodes of Drawdown's Neighborhood. Because Josna points to why stories matter. And in short, similar to my dad's story, it's because a lot of people haven't had their voices heard. Here's a very short clip from Josna talking about that.
The stories from frontline communities, I feel, that are the essential testimonies that we don't often hear, but that can really guide us in the just solutions that we're seeking.
So like Joseph said, it's so often the stories of frontline communities. And in the US context, when I talk about this, I often talk about Black communities, Indigenous communities, communities of color, low-income communities who are often the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate, but also the least represented in the conversation. I think in each of your communities, you all as community members know that there are a variety of voices and perspectives and identities that might not be heard from or shared as often in stories.
The stories from
And so I love the work that Josta does because it really brings in so many of those voices and stories, and it also in part inspires me to do the work that we do at Drawdown Stories to bring in the voices that often go unheard. Stories also have the power to shape culture, and what I mean by that is that when we look around us, think about the TV shows, the movies, plays, other media that you hear from, and think about how that's informed or educated or inspired you in different ways. Stories have that power. They also have the power to help us know what's possible. So when we ask, how can we know what's possible? Stories are also the answer to that question. And the person I think of who is an amazing example of that, who really inspires me, is Clara Katango, who works at the organization Tree Pittsburgh, and who really embodies the ability of stories to shape culture. Clara actually is inspired and talks about this in her Drawdowns Neighborhood episode by none other than the first African woman to win a Nobel Prize, Wangari Maathai, who literally worked with trees just like Clara does. And I can't recommend Clara's Drawdowns Neighborhood episode enough because she talks about just being a Black woman in Pittsburgh and being someone who wasn't comfortable with trees and seeing Wangari's example and finally seeing herself as part of the solution. And so I think it's really remarkable and just a clear example that stories matter because they help us see what's possible. They help us see what's possible. And I'm going to show a clip from Clara Katango in a second. This is actually a clip of Clara singing her song Roots, which as an artist, as an educator, she shares with young people to engage them with climate solutions. And I share this clip not only because I love the song that she sings, but also because I think it speaks to the fact that there's not just one kind of right story. There are so many different types of stories that we're able to share. And there are also different ways we could share. We could tell people stories. We could use art. We can use music. And Clara is a shining example of that. And so here is Clara Katango during the middle of our interview, singing her song, Roots.
For so long the people have been pressed down. The system got me wonder where to break down. Sun up to sundown, working for my ransom, trying not to feel like I'm let down, but moving forward as I sway to the beat and finding my position as I prepare the heat. Swaying to the rhythm, feeling how I flow. I hold leap of concrete waves I swim through, so it's straight to the roots I go. Mine's elevated, it's love related, and it's straight to the roots I go.
Clara is so talented, and I hope everyone, while you're on mute, is just giving her a round of applause for that. Because the thing I love about that song is that it points to the need for us to go to our roots. What is our story? What got us engaged? And how could we share that to help others see that they belong too? How can we share, our roots, and how can we go to our roots to help also change behavior, which is the third lever of climate solutions that I want to talk about today in sharing the power of climate solutions. And when it comes to changing behavior, one question that I've often asked myself is, how can we unlock everyday climate superpowers? How can we go from having people who are not in the conversation when it comes to climate solutions? How can we go from having people who don't necessarily feel powerful or don't necessarily see their place in this space, like you all now have as climate advocates, to really finding their own everyday climate superpower, which might be working to plant trees, it might be educating people, it might be advocating and getting people to push for the policies and the policy change that's needed. There are so many things that we can do, but one of the quotes that, or one of the messages that I think is really powerful when it comes to this topic is actually from Robin Okinawa, who is also featured in Drawdown's Neighborhood, which you can find again at drawdown.org/neighborhood. And Robin works with the Captain Planet Foundation. You'll remember at the start of this video, I am a fan of Captain Planet, so I was thrilled to talk with Robin. And Robin talks about the importance of stories to help her find her place in making a difference. And I think that not only does this resonate with me, but I've heard that this resonates with a lot of different folks. So the thing that I also just want to appreciate about Robin, and she shares this in her full story in Drawdown's Neighborhood, is that for a long time she didn't see herself as being part of climate solutions or making a difference or having the ability to work with other young Black students, which she says is the pride and joy of her work. So here is a clip of Robin.
If representation didn't matter, we wouldn't talk about it. But because people have been so historically excluded from spaces, to see yourself in that space and know that you belong, that matters. Because never would I have thought that I could do the job that I wanted to do in a space that focused on Black people and climate. Now I get to do that, but with kids all over the world.
The thing that jumps out to me most about Robin is exactly what she says, is that she never thought that she could do the work that she's doing today until she realized, oh, okay, there are stories of people who are working to support rights and move rights forward for Black communities and other communities while also working on climate. And that's why stories matter. And that's why the stories in Drawdown's Neighborhood matter. Here are the 37 folks that we featured to date, with more stories actually coming out this fall. And, you know, I think what's so powerful is that each and every one of these people has something that they share that could connect with somebody else. It might be, again, that they are a parent, that they love comic books and art. It might be that they love singing. It might be their family history or their background and the challenges that they've navigated through life. There are so many things that are featured in these stories, and I can't encourage you enough, again, to check out the stories at drawdown.org/neighborhood, which you can go to, or you can go to drawdown.org/stories and click, scroll down to find the Drawdown's Neighborhood page. And, you know, as I kind of get closer to the end and get closer to a point where I can answer some of your questions, I want to put into perspective why stories matter, or the impact of stories, a little bit more. So we could talk about, you know, something like transportation or like electricity and the climate solutions within it in this kind of way. Actually, when I joined Project Drawdown about 3 years ago, this is largely how we talked about climate solutions. We didn't have specific examples, but we had these bubble diagrams that feature specific climate solutions. So this is the example of transportation, and you'll see things like electric cars, electric trains. And this is just one example of how we talk about solutions. So on the drawdown.org website, you'll find nearly 100 different climate solutions that are listed out. This is just one example, distributed solar photovoltaics, which for those who don't know, is a fancy way, I'd say, of just saying solar energy. And so this is traditionally how folks have talked about solar energy and its impact in terms of gigatons of carbon and billions of dollars that it costs to implement the solutions, as well as trillions of dollars that are saved over time. And I think that for me at least, and for a lot of people I've connected with, this doesn't resonate or doesn't necessarily connect with them. In other words, I heard someone once share, like, I don't know what a gigaton of carbon looks like or feels like. But the thing that is really powerful is that while this might not convince someone like, okay, we need to have solar energy, what does is stories. And so stories like Bob Blake, who works with solar energy and actually has an organization called Solar Bear, where Bob not only works to install solar all over Minnesota, but he also especially works to engage Indigenous and Native communities in solar and climate solutions so that they could receive that opportunity and be part of the solution. It's stories like Willie Jones III, who works with Groundwork New Orleans, and Willie is in New Orleans and grew up in the time of Hurricane Katrina and other storms. And despite all the challenges that he's had in his life, which have included like losing his father at one point and a number of other hurdles, he continues to have hope for the future and push for a better world. It's so inspiring to check out Willie's story on the Drawdown's Neighborhood website. And it's stories like Tanya Hicks. Tanya is the founder of an organization called Power Solutions that not only works with solar energy, but with energy efficiency overall in the Atlanta area. And she is just an incredible inspiration, but Tanya talks about how progress is progress, fast or slow, and that despite the challenges, despite being underestimated, that we just need to keep moving and keep going. And again, it's these stories that connect with people and I think help people see that their story is powerful despite the fact that we might not know our story. We might not take time to have shared our story yet. If there's one thing though that I want to leave you with today before I get to your questions, it is that our stories matter because not only are they the reason that we do what we do, and not only are they the reason that we are who we are, but they also help people connect the pieces and connect the dots. In other words, they help people answer questions like, what can I do? Do I belong? Stories provide that permission to people to make a difference, to be climate advocates, whether with FXP or otherwise. And I think that that is one of the things that I would share with you is that you could spend time with your story and think about your story. It might not feel like the perfect story, but I would also say that there's not a perfect story. There's a diversity of stories in a bunch of different shapes and sizes with a bunch of different titles, and your story is your unique story. But I think in leaning into that, as opposed to just talking about the statistics and data, leaning into your story and why you do what you do is the thing that people emotionally will connect with. It's also the thing that will give other people ideas and help them see that they can be powerful when it comes to solutions. When you find your power, or when you help someone else find their power, there is what is called a ripple effect. A ripple effect of, you never know like what that next person's going to do. Who are they going to inspire? What solutions will they inspire? And how will they help us collectively move towards solutions? So it's going to take a lot to do what we need to do to save our planet and to address climate change in the ways we have to. But the beautiful thing is that solutions are in the world today. There are people, not only like the people that we feature in Drawdown's Neighborhood, but like all of you who are making a positive difference already. And I just want to thank you all for the work that you're doing, because while it might feel small, while it might feel like just a drop in the bucket, your work matters. We need everyone on board that we can get on board to do something to move climate solutions forward. And I just want to thank you all for your time today. Here's where you can learn more about the work I do or even get in touch. at drawdown.org/stories. On LinkedIn, you can connect with me. I'm Matt Scott on LinkedIn, and of course, use my email as well. And I'll try to get back to folks as soon as possible on that, because there are many emails that come in.